Hello and welcome to today's show. Today I interview my friend Mary Beth LaRue. Mary Beth is a yoga teacher, a coach, a writer, and of course a mama. And she became a mama through foster adoption. So we go deep into the foster care process and adopting out of foster care and everything that her and her husband endured in that 2.5-year process to become parents to now 5-year-old Angel, who is thriving with them here in Colorado. We also talk a lot about the nervous system and embodiment, managing reactivity, and really finding a rhythm in your life that matches the pace that you want. And this was just a really cool conversation about how life ebbs and flows and changes and how to navigate motherhood and parenting regardless of what's happening in the external world, and especially through the lens of a foster and adoptive mom, which is a different lens than I come from and from most guests on the show. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. Welcome back to today's show. Today I'm here with Mary Beth LaRue, a friend of mine who, we've known each other for years. Mary Beth is a yoga teacher, coach, a writer, and a mama. We have a lot to talk about because I love your journey into motherhood, and it's a little different than a lot of the rest of us. So thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I know.
To see you in person, not always virtual.
We live like an hour apart now, and we still haven't even seen you since you've been a Colorado resident.
Almost 3 years.
I know. Well, I'm really excited to hear from you because watching your journey into motherhood, it's so different to see the journey of foster adoption than even like some of my friends I know that have sought out adoption, because you went through the foster system first. And so I really want to talk about that, especially from the motherhood perspective, where I don't even think that we can comprehend how it felt to not know what was going to happen. But before we jump into all of that, can you just give a little bit of background on how you got here, your journey into yoga especially, but becoming a coach and a writer, and you are such a beautiful writer. And then how did motherhood factor into that, especially once you had Angel, and, how did you feel like your ambition shifted as you became a mother and were still an entrepreneur?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much to cover.
Yeah.
I'll try to make this part brief. I'm from a little town in Iowa, and I grew up there and fell in love with writing, journalism. So I ended up going to University of Iowa, interning at Jane magazine, ended up working at National Geographic. And while I was there, I found the practice of yoga as a way to really deal with the depression I was feeling of moving to a big city and leaving my family. And most of all, leaving Iowa City, where I rode my bike around with my notebook all day and wrote and worked and just had like a very, I would say, mellow rhythm, which I found again in the mountains, finally. And I ended up falling madly in love with yoga. I did my first training probably 6 or 7 months into practicing, but I swore up and down I'd never teach. I had a huge fear of speaking. I still get really nervous. And I've reframed it, though. I can't remember who said this. Oh, Max Strom, fear is excitement without breath, which factors in so perfectly to what I do.
Yeah.
And yeah, once I did my training, I just couldn't get enough. Like, I was seeking out more practice. I went on a retreat. I started really merging writing and the yoga practice, which has led to loving embodiment, which feels way more me than yoga. Ended up moving to Los Angeles, followed a boy, not the boy that I married, but followed a boy to Los Angeles and met our mutual friend, Jackie, and just really put myself on the line. Like, I put myself in a lot of uncomfortable situations of teaching a class that one person was in and paying rent for a studio class that one person was in or no one was donating. And I just decided that I loved what I was doing enough to ride out those waves. And I think that's really important, especially if you're beginning to teach or take on really any entrepreneurial journey, is, do you love it enough to weather the storm? Because it's inevitable. I ended up working with Yoga Journal on a variety of things, Wanderlust festivals, traveling all over the country, teaching, founding a company with Jackie Carr, who is the most inspiring. And we created Rock Your Bliss. So for 6 or 7 years, we had Rock Your Bliss. Or was it longer? No, 6 or 7 years. And it was a coaching and yoga hybrid company. So in that period, I also got certified in life coaching by Martha Beck and have done like a variety of things with different coaches through that time. And now I live here. I live on top of a mountain, Evergreen, Colorado. Jackie lived here, made me fall in love with it. And now she's off on her next adventure to live in Maine. And I feel so grateful that she brought me here. It's a really slow, steady pace of life. It suits my rhythm. I go down to Denver once a week. We travel. Like, I love to dance with higher energy and like being out there in the world, but I am introverted. So in order to refill, I have to go in.
Yeah.
And so now my business is virtual and whatnot. So
I loved when you said mellow rhythm, because that's like, that is mountain town to me. That mellow, especially if you live in the mountain town. If you're visiting to ski in Colorado and you go to a mountain town, it might not feel like a mellow rhythm. But those of us that live here, it's like there is a very different feel to the small towns and the mountains and the walking right out your door to nature. And I remember you speaking about that with the transition out of LA, especially once you had Angel, to say you guys agreed you didn't want to raise him in the LA rhythm, in the energy of LA. You wanted to be closer to nature and in a slower pace. And I think it's really cool to see you transition back here and make that transition so smoothly, especially with him like walking out your back door into nature every day. So once I know in LA is when you guys decided to pursue the foster system, becoming foster parents. And so can you tell us a little bit about, one, the decision to choose to be a foster parent? Because I know that in and of itself is probably a whole other episode about just the like spiritual and mental load of opening yourself up to care and to be a foster parent, where you don't know what's coming and what they have been through as children that you're taking in, and you don't know how long they'll be with you. So a little bit about the story of why you chose foster to begin with, and then once you had him, how the adoption process unfolded.
Okay. Matt and I have been together 12 years. We actually have our 10-year wedding anniversary next week. And I knew from the minute I met him, he wanted to be a dad. Like, he just has like that loving dad energy. And it sounded fun to be a parent with Matt. I can't say that being a mom was something that was always top of mind for me. It just wasn't something I thought about a lot. And it wasn't something that I don't know, like some women, they picture themselves pregnant, or they picture like how that would unfold, or breastfeeding, or what that bond would look like. And for me, I really had no interest. And so we had tried to get pregnant for a little bit, and we went and saw a fertility doctor in LA or Pasadena. And within like minutes, IVF was being pushed on us. And I just had a full body reaction of like, I started sobbing and got really hot, like sweaty, like, get me the F out of here right now. And the doctor and my husband were thinking, oh my God, she's devastated. And instead I was having a feeling like, this doesn't feel right. And so we left with a large folder of information, and we went and got ice cream, I remember. And we're sitting outside, and Matt was like, what happened? And I said, I don't know. I'm willing to explore this, and whatever we decide to do. I was like, I just had a really crazy visceral reaction. And I remember writing in the first blog I wrote about this, I said, like, should we just move to Bali? Like, should we choose a life where we're not going to be parents and go do whatever we want? And that didn't land either. So we were on a walk a few days later, and I had said, what about adoption? Because I'd researched more about IVF, and I mean, it's brought so many beautiful children into our lives. Many of my friends have had IVF, like people I know, and it's such a gift for the people that it's meant for. But the more that I looked into it, I would also read about people who decided not to go that route and adopt. And so as Matt and I were walking, I said, how about adoption? And he's like, yes. Like, it was like an absolute full body yes, just like I had a full body no. And I have a yoga student named Taylor who she was always in the front row of my yoga classes at Wanderlust, like these big classes, and she just has the best energy. And I remember her telling me that she worked in adoption, but what she said was she works in foster care, but what I heard was adoption. And so it was foster care, and when it leads to adoption, which it certainly doesn't always, you would adopt. So a couple days later, so this is like a week span from the time we met with the doctor to the time we are now deciding this is the route, maybe less actually. We move pretty fast when we're sure, real fast actually. And I sat at Taylor's house. It was just me. And she was like explaining the foster care system to me in Los Angeles, 37,000 kids in one county who are in foster care. Like, I think I'll have to double check this, but in the state of Colorado alone, it's like between 4,000 and 6,000 in the entire state. And so, and then I said, well, what about adoption? Or what about private adoption? She's like, I don't know anything about that. I mean, I know it's something, but I don't know enough. Like, this is my lane. And that sometimes when you've been fostering and the termination of parental rights happens, like the judge, and there's been tons of research done and tons of visits for many children, then the child might be deemed up for adoption. And in that case, you would adopt. So Matt and I went and met with Extraordinary Families, which was the foster family agency we worked with in Los Angeles. And we sat down with the head of it. And she had adopted 3 children on her own from foster care, teenagers. And she explained everything. We asked questions. Matt and I actually didn't look at each other, which I think is a really interesting thing. And we walked out side by side. And he goes, "We're doing this, right?" I'm like, "Yes, we're doing this." And we moved so fast. Also, I'm a Virgo. So like, when I'm ready to go, it is like on. So we moved through our training. Like, I made sure Matt flew home from London for work and literally showed up at training to not miss the session, like drove right there. And we met some amazing people we'd be going through the foster journey with. Let's say, okay, so that was June or July when we started training. We were done with training in October. Then they have to do a home visit, the social workers, to make sure your home is fit. And there's lots of stuff you have to change. Like if the hot water's too hot, if you need to cover your outlets, like tons of stuff. Like so your stairs need to be blocked off. If you have a hot tub, there needs to be a fence around it, like all sorts of things. But once again, the list. I was good at it. Matt's like, "You can't get an A+ in foster care." And I grew to understand that big time. And we then were just so excited. We got a room ready for a child. We had no idea. Like, I didn't want a newborn. So I said 6 months to a year up until like 4 years old. But the call we got was for a newborn. And a lot of our friends who had been through the process said, "You'll get a lot of calls. You don't have to say yes, like listen to your gut, whatever you think." And I was in Venice Beach about to teach a yoga private. And we got a call and it said Extraordinary Families. And I just like already felt dizzy. And our social worker, Emily, said, "I have a little boy. He's 6 days old. He doesn't have a name," and went through like, he has nowhere to go. So I said, "Okay, let me call Matt." She's like, "You got to let me know fast because I got to start calling." And so I called Matt and he's like, "I don't think we're supposed to say yes to the first call." I was like, "That's not based on like reality. That's based on experience, right? Other people's experience." And so we said yes. And then we waited to see if we were still the people who would meet him. And we were. And we took our car seat out of the box and we loaded it into the car. Like Matt and I are just trying to like figure everything out because we also didn't really think it was to happen that day. It was a week, I think, after we got fully certified and open for calls. And we drove to the hospital he was at. I remember we walked into the wrong hospital. Then we had to go through, we're walking down this corridor. We have name tags on. And I am just like, it's so surreal. You can't even explain it. I'm sure it's like a high that is similar with, I'm sure, meeting your child. Like, and we walk in and there's this beautiful little boy in a bassinet and it's clear around the side so I can see him there. And I I would love that Matt had me walk up to meet him first. And like, I just like put my hand on his little heart, and he didn't open his eyes for like the first couple hours. Like he was asleep, and we got to hold him and, I mean, give him milk and talk to the nurses. He had 10 hats that were knit by nurses because he was so loved. Like over 6 days.
Yeah.
Like he just was like drenched in love by these nurses. And yeah, so then we brought him home the next day because they had to stay for a little bit longer. And from there, we were aboard the foster care roller coaster.
Yeah. And I remember seeing it, and, you know, and you couldn't share a lot through that initial time because I know like the legal process prevents you from sharing anything that would identify him because there's a lot of court proceedings going. And then even once you knew that he was up for adoption, or it looked like you would be able to adopt him.
Well, that his rights were terminated, but there's still like an appeal process and all that.
And I remember like a family member ended up appealing, and there was like some really touch and go periods there where at least from afar, we were witnessing you go through what I can only imagine is an incredibly devastating emotional roller coaster to love a child and to have set your heart on he's ours, and then to have a call come that's like there's someone challenging your rights to this, and they want, you know, there's more investigation that has to happen. There's a chance you won't get to be his parents.
Well, you also, just real quick, like you don't have rights as a foster parent. You have no rights. So like I do say to people now, like had I approached it knowing what I know now, I would always enter foster care to foster. Of course, we knew that was part of our journey, but also we did want to adopt, right? And so I had at one point, my coach, Shelly, she had me look up in the dictionary what foster care was and what adoption was. And she's like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm fostering. She's like, then why are you fighting reality? Because this was a year and a half in or something, just a wreck. And so that too, of like, the job of foster care is to reunify the child and the parent, which makes sense, right? That does make sense if the parent can take care of the child. And we got to the point where we were really trying to help them reunify because that felt important to us. And I don't reveal a lot because it's Angel's story. It's not even mine, but that was an important thing to understand, that like how much you do shift in the process, or we did.
Yeah. So while you're fostering and you're going through all of this, you said you moved quickly, and prior to even deciding to foster or adopt, you were kind of iffy on even wanting to be a mother, and obviously had like a visceral reaction to the IVF process, which is again another whole story. And because you're so embodied, I can imagine there's a lot of like nervous system intuition of how that would have gone. But as you're going through foster adoption, through the story, and you know, and then the day came where you guys were officially able to adopt him, and that was what, 2 years in almost by then?
2.5 years.
Yeah, 2.5 in. So
like, it was the middle of the pandemic too.
Yeah. And so how did you feel like motherhood come on during that time? Because what I think from the outside is hard to imagine as a biological mother, who I left the hospital with my baby and no one was ever going to challenge my rights to him. You know, I obviously had my own struggles with feeling, you know, what a mother is and the identity shift, but I didn't have any external question of whether or not I was going to like remain a mother. And I imagine for you, and that's what I want to get at, is like, at what point or how did you manage like maternal feelings and wanting to be his mother and wanting to mother him no matter how long he was with you, you know, until literally the day you signed the papers, with the possibility that it might not actually be? What did that mental load feel like, and how did you manage that?
Well, the first part, there's a lot of layers to that, but the first part is that the minute I saw him, I was a mother. Like my body thought I gave birth. Like I had the weirdest reaction, like my boobs swelled, like I couldn't stop crying, like all sorts of other things we won't get into, but like my body thought I gave birth to him. So the second that I was connected to him, I knew I was there to mother him no matter what. And we went to trial, and I took the stand, and I was the one who took the stand. And one question was, so do you think you're his mom? And I said, why the label? Like, my job was to mother him. When he was in the hospital, who slept on that stupid ass little plastic bed next to him for 7 days? Me. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Like, I instantly, mothering this baby and child, and now he's 5, like going to kindergarten this year. Ugh, there was no question.
Yeah.
Like, that was just it. Like, and I felt everything in me say, this is how you were supposed to be a mom.
Yeah.
Like, this is who you were supposed to meet. And that's why you had that feeling. And that's why you had this reaction. Like, this child, whether he stayed forever or he stayed for 3 months, I was meant to mother him. And I would always be a part of his story, whether he knew who I was or not. If he left, he'd never know who I was. Also, and I know this is hard for moms to think about or talk about, and we know it, none of it's guaranteed. We don't know if our babies are going to be around forever. We don't know if we are. There's so much uncertainty in the human experience that we numb out and don't look at, because it does this, right? It opens something in us that's uncontrollable and so unfathomable that how could we? And so I think with foster care too, it was like, I felt like I was getting my PhD in uncertainty of like, this is actually what life is, right? It is uncertain. And I paid so much attention to every second because I didn't think he'd still be there. And I really did not think. Like, it is a miracle. Like, we went to court 37 times, and at least 25 of those times, I thought I wouldn't have him for maybe a couple more hours. And that was it. And so that changes you.
It really drives home the point, and that's why I wanted to speak to you so much about motherload, because I think a lot of times the burden of the mother or the emotions of the mother, the highs and the lows that a mother goes through towards a child are really biased towards biological birth, and that
Totally.
You gave birth to that child. And that's really the only way that you would feel the depth of emotion and the depth of what motherhood really feels like. And I know, talking to you and hearing your story over the last years and watching you go through it, that I don't think that's true. And you're explaining that right now, where the second you saw him, you biologically felt it, and emotionally, spiritually, everything else was instantly there, and I think that is a testament to what I always say about motherhood, where, there's a difference between motherhood and parenting. And, I think if you went in with the foster care mindset, it's like, I'm going to parent and care for this child while his other parents are not able to. And then we'll work to put him back there if it's a safe situation, versus like stepping in as a mother and really embodying the mother energy to say, I don't know what the future holds, which is what you said so beautifully. None of us know. None of us have certainty about any future with our children. So in this moment, I will mother him because that's the energy he needs from me. And that's what I feel drawn to provide. And the parenting situation may change and it may not last, but that's uncertain for all of us. And I agree with that so wholeheartedly around like existential motherhood, that once you become a mother, whether you gave birth to the child or not, or, even the reverse, like the person who gave birth to Angel is still a mother, she 100%. May not, she's not in his life, but, there's so many ways to define it. And I think not a lot of us want to talk about how that experience differs or is so similar, even if we didn't become mothers in the same way. And I think that's one of the something that I feel like is missing in our culture, is this like global appreciation for how all of us can show up as mothers, whether or not we gave birth to the child.
Yep. Well, and I think too, it's like when I think about his mother, and I say mother, I don't say birth mom, like mom, that's a mom, mother, right? And it's like, we can hold both. Like, she's his mom and I'm his mom. I'm the one who's here. I'm so grateful for that. But I didn't have that experience. And I remember a friend's husband saying, and she told me this after the fact, of like, do you think Mary Beth and Matt will really like be able to like love him once they know? And at one, I've like had a very embodied visceral reaction to that. Like, I was like, where's he at? But also it's a fair question of like, no, we were all in. Like, we felt yes, we felt a little safer once we knew he was adopted, but like it also just being a parent is so effing vulnerable anyway. Like I remember saying to my coach, I was like, well, now I'm worried about mountain lions.
Yeah.
Right now I've moved on from foster care to the 9 zillion other things in my sphere that are scary about being a parent. Like he is my Achilles heel. Everything about me is taking care, loving, worried about this child. And now I have to manage that because I don't want him to feel that energy.
Yeah.
Right. Of like super intense.
Well, and that kind of gets into my next question is, okay, so you've gone and you are so embodied and do so much of this deep, deep work and are so in tune with your nervous system, but, you know, undeniably went through an amount of trauma in becoming a mother, you know, and in that 2.5 years where it wasn't certain. And we joke about mountain lions and stuff because it's a actual reality where we live. You know, like I think about that at the cabin all the time. Like
funny,
should I have my kids being out here? Like we have a game camera set up and I see that freaking giant mountain lion that lives right around our cabin all the time on the game camera. But you know, don't worry if you come to Colorado. But you know, like those are like funny jokes that are part of our like, you know, fight or flight nervous system, like the daily thing of being a mother. But how have you processed or are you aware in your day-to-day relationship with him now that he is legally yours and he is 5 and he's like a little talking kid that is going to ask questions about his life? And, you know, how are you integrating or are you still in the process of integrating, you know, some of that trauma that came in those early years?
I'm definitely integrating still. You know, as much work as I've done, every time I was in that courtroom, I would like feel like I was in a blackout. And one of the tools my coach gave me was to just name things. So I'd be like clock, chair, judge, and even take the judge down to man, human, like just keep bringing it out of the story because I was so charged. And I work very hard on my nervous system. My nervous system is very fragile ecosystem. So especially as I get older, I think. And so, yes, I have trauma to work on, but also there is trauma of adoption. And so learning, you know, as beautiful as a story we think this is, Angel's life started with loss. And so to acknowledge that, to understand that, we talk about his adoption all the time. Even today, it was like, I slept in his bunk bed last night and I have the last 3 nights and it has not been the best, but I get to spoon him and like wake up and he goes, Mommy, how long were my arms when you met me? You know, the like just random, like, how long were my arms? I'm like, oh, about like this long. He's like, oh, 6 days old. My arms were that short. I'm like, yeah. And then it goes on to, did you love me the minute you saw me?
Oh.
This is how I'm waking up. I'm like, yes, I loved you more than anything in my life. Like, so I'm starting my day, but also like, what an amazing way to start your day, right?
Yeah.
Like from that very true, honest space, we'll be processing, hopefully, for the rest of my life together. And I'll do whatever I can to be supportive and to try to get it, but I won't get it. I'm a white woman, major privilege, who got to choose to be in foster care. He didn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many layers to that. And like, I can feel the emotion even in myself because you know, Sawyer is a similar age. I don't think they're very far apart. And yeah, just the questions that even Sawyer starts to ask about his own life. I think there's a lot of self-actualization that happens like around 5 or 6, and they start to realize that they're separate from us and they have their own choices. And some of that comes out as like sassy defiance. And you know, which I dealt with this morning with my almost 6-year-old. And some of it comes out as like these profound grounding questions that stop you in your track as a mother to go, yeah, of course I loved you the second I met you, or the second you came out of my body. Like, you know, and I had a C-section. So anytime he sees my C-section scar, he's like, how did my body fit through that? Was I awake? You know, like all these questions. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, like how cool that our kids want to understand how they came to be and what we felt about them, you know, and it makes me think about my own mother and going, did I ever ask her those questions? You know, like, do I remember understanding that about my mom, you know, and it brings up then that opens the whole door of like, okay, how are we parenting our children differently than we were parented? And that's a question I have for you, like, because you came from rural Iowa and you had what you described as like the slower pace and all this freedom. And we grew up in a different time where
yeah,
we didn't have the awareness of a lot of the stuff, most of the things that all of us now have awareness of super early on. And even before we pressed record, we're talking about how my kid is home today on an iPad right now while we're recording, and he's watching YouTube. And I'm like, don't watch anything I wouldn't let you watch,
Totally.
But
best of luck.
Yeah. But it's like, looking at how we were raised and how you were raised, and then looking at how are you consciously choosing to raise Angel in today's world, both in reverence to his past and what you mentioned about, he came from loss and didn't choose that path, and you had choice in that. But even on a bigger scale, to look at, how we were raised, how you were raised, and the values you grew up with, and what you might have thought motherhood would have looked like, or what parenting would have looked like versus what the reality is now. And how are you approaching the choices you're making and raising him, and how you navigate kind of this existential aspect of motherhood that I speak to a lot in the podcast around, like, the world is kind of scary to a mother, especially if we're only 2 days after yet another school shooting right now. And I felt this way last year coming off of the last school shooting, where it was just days before I went in for kindergarten orientation with Sawyer. And I was like, I was like scanning doors and looking at the security and all this stuff. And I'm going, I never thought I'd have, I guess I didn't think about what I would have to think about with my kids when I was a kid. But now that I'm an adult, I look back and I'm like, I don't think I ever would have thought that me walking my child into kindergarten, my first thought would have been, I wonder how secure these doors are, and if they check IDs before people walk in. And so, talk to me through that. Like, how are you navigating your own like childhood, and how you thought it would be versus how it is, and what that feels like?
I feel like part of the move here was to get back to the simplicity of that childhood. LA was amazing. Honestly, I feel safer in LA sometimes because it was what I knew. And I felt there was so much about it that I celebrated. However, a mom with a regulated nervous system is like probably the best gift we can give our kids, which is really hard in today's world. So at the top of my to-do list is to go for a walk outside. When Angel's with me, he's on the walk outside, reading books, answering all of his questions, which I am not good at. I'm like, he will ask, like, how does the sewer system work? How does this work? How does a bumblebee process this? I'm like, oh my God, I'm an idiot, right? Like, but we go into inquiry together and like learn, and my husband's great at that. So what I feel, although I'm very concerned about the world and I do what I can, I'm focusing on my family and now my little community, which I'm back in a small town, which I never would have thought. I ran about as fast as I could in the other direction when I grew up in one. And to focus on the simple moments and how present I can be for him, and to walk side by side. I think that's a big part too, is we talk to Angel in a way that we're really conversing. Like I've gathered you do too from like what you've spoken about. And he's my little buddy. Like we'll go out for coffee and have like really deep chats. And I mean, I'm having coffee. And I'm very concerned. However, I have hope that we're going to figure some things out for these kids. I'm grappling with it just as much as I think everybody else. I don't have the answers, and focusing on what I can feel. Mark Nepo talks about slowing down the train that is me until what is before me is feelable, seeable, and something else, but like being in the experience. And so doing that together feels good.
And I think that the takeaway of like the focus on the family, and I know, social media is such an echo chamber around these things, but and without diving into all the different things that are scary to mothers right now, it's this like overarching feeling of our children are going to be exposed to so much. And some of it may be things that we can help them understand. And some of it may be things that they just have to process without us. And some of it may be things we agree with in our values, and some of it may be things we don't agree with in our values. And again, we may have control over how it gets processed to an extent. And a lot of it, they will have to learn how to process on their own and make their own decisions about. And I think I love what you're saying about ultimately, I can have hope and I can participate in a cultural conversation around change and to try to influence things to go the way that I want. But also my biggest opportunity is to show up regulated in my own body and my own self and be present in my child's life to be the source of inquiry for him. So when he's asking questions and navigating. And I think that that's a big part of the mother load is for those of us that are trying to be in that like devoted mother role where we can be available to them and we do allow there to be questions. And it might be that they grow up believing something differently than us, you know, and we are accepting of that. And like, God, there's so many layers to that. And I think that sometimes when I start to feel like it gets really heavy because there's so many things that I don't know, I'm not an expert on, and I want it to go one way, but the world's going another way. And I'm like, he's going to have to make a choice on this. And a lot of times I'm like, it would just be easier if I just said, it is this way and this is the only way. And you will believe this. And that's
like
it.
We were raised kind of.
Yes.
Or at least.
Yeah. I mean, and I think our parents did that because there weren't so many choices and that's how they were raised, you know? So, but the generational cycles are changing. And I often grapple with, is this one, like, I'm so stressed out, or I don't have time to do the learning or the research on this social justice question that he's asking me a related question and I need to answer it in a way that isn't me imposing my values, but is me expressing that this is a good question and let's talk through it. You know, I often feel like it's easier as a mother on those days where I'm feeling super overloaded and there's so much on my plate to say, nope, it is this way. And this is what you will believe. And I catch myself to go, okay, I want to make a different choice as a parent in how I present, you know, these type of questions that he's starting to ask. And that requires me to go even deeper into, okay, my nervous system management. How am I going to show up? What do I really believe about this? And what is Lindsay's belief? And what is my parents' belief, or me trying to fit in, or whatever it might be? And so I just think it's such a important reminder to all of us to think about, ultimately, you can choose how you, the individual, want to participate in the discourse in our culture. But the best thing you can do for your children is to be available for the conversation and to let them learn from you and also ask questions. And I think that can feel like a heavy load to mothers because it is like the incessant questions. And a lot of times you're like, I'm trying to work, or I'm trying to do something else. I don't have time to answer this question. But knowing and to have our childhoods as the frame of reference to then come back into presence with our own children and go, wait a second, like when I asked these questions and I just was rebuked with this is the way it is as a child, I turned out a certain way and I'm trying to change that pattern here, you know?
Yeah, I think the biggest testament to if I've done this the way I want to do it, which would be him as a teenager still asking me a lot of questions and feeling safe to say like, hey, can you pick me up? Or safe to say, I don't know. Because like I hope we can keep walking. That would be the biggest gift, is to keep walking side by side and him to know that I want him to fully be his own person. Like, even though we have like a college fund, I always say to Matt, I'm like, I don't want to call it a college fund. I want him to do what he wants to. Does he want to go to art school? Does he want to go to trade school? Does he want to travel the world for a year? Like, I want him to have that support, but to know that like, he is going to become his own person. And he already is. And at 5, I'm already in awe. He's teaching me, right? If I can only remember that, of like, he woke me up, not on my phone, but asking me how long his arms are or were at birth. Yeah. That's real different than waking up with Gmail.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
and so that kind of discovery together, it's such a ride.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. And the parents I know today that feel like they did a really good job shifting the generational patterns are the parents that have like tweens or teenagers and they are best friends, you know, or like in a healthy way, not a codependent way, but like, you know, where, their teenage daughters feel safe to say what's going on. And when they're struggling with mental health, their teenage boys are asking questions about boundaries and consent and things like that, and are curious about the world and love to learn, and are good learners, and are learning and performing at school in a way that's self-motivated, not performance-oriented or, external achievement-oriented. And, I think so many of us millennials grew up in that generation of like, you can do anything. And we read that in our minds as like, you have to do everything because you can, so you should. And, we're conscious, as I know you are, of like you just said, I don't expect you to go to college if that's not going to be the right choice for you. It is available to you. And of course, we want you to pursue as much academic, support and training and education as you want. But we have removed, as you have, this expectation of the next step after high school is college, no doubt, no question. So the next thing I want to ask is, now that you're in your new rhythm in Colorado and you work from home and, you're exploring new ways of being in business after the pandemic, what does a normal day look like for you? And how are you managing kind of the day-to-day as someone who, I know you have an identity that is formed around your gifts and your passions. And I've seen you in that gift, prior to becoming a mother and after becoming a mother. And I know what it's like to have a child at home and to have weathered pandemic and to be navigating, childcare, no childcare, school, whatever. And so how are you laying out your days, and how do you manage doing all of these things on a day-to-day basis?
Well, first of all, I love to work, just like you. I love it. Like when I have to take a break for a little bit and then I come back to it, I'm so excited. Like my notebook is full right now because I'm relaunching a bunch of stuff and launching things later. And I like that Angel sees how passionate I am. So he'll like wander into a yoga class sometimes, similar to what just happened. And finding the rhythm, I would say, well, first of all, I started teaching virtually pre-COVID, which was super weird. I remember Live Kick reached out. They're like, would you teach a yoga class on Zoom? I'm like, you're nuts. Sure. But because I traveled so long pre-motherhood, and I don't feel that drawn to do it right now, to be honest, but like, because I traveled so much, my students are all over the place. And so my community is all over the place. And so Zoom was amazing. So that started October 2019, which is ridiculous. And I would say all my days are pretty different. I try to wake up about an hour before Angel and Matt, so I have my time. I haven't gotten to the dark. I mean, it is a little dark, but not as early as you yet. But I get up, I make my coffee. I like to tidy up a little bit in the morning, and then I meditate and just like get the house set, the energy set for the day. And either Matt or I take him to school. And then from there, I always have like what the focus will be for the day. So yesterday I had a friend in town and Angel had spring break last week. So yesterday was a bit of a catch up. So I just kind of brain dumped everything that was floating around. And then I start to figure out what days need more focus. So like today on the podcast, now I'm going to teach a 45-minute virtual flow after this. I lead a virtual teacher training. So I lead a lot of virtual stuff. And now I'm going to start to bring in elements. I think I'm going to start teaching a class once a month in Denver, a candlelit slow flow, because I love Denver. And then to still do my retreats. What I would like to prioritize more is time with just my notebook where I'm writing and letting things come forth, because I think when I can get into that juggle place that I really thrive in of just being kind of busy, but not much creativity is usually born out of that. It's satisfying for a minute, but it's not satisfying long-term.
Yeah.
So I have this quote for the week. Originality can only arise when you are connected to yourself. It's an act of honesty. We'll have to look up who it's by because I just wrote it in my moleskin. But I thought that was such a cool thing of like, also the reason I do what I do in some ways too is to have blank space on my calendar so that I can go for a walk and have a little spontaneity.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that you mentioned that and like admit that, because I think a lot of us are, myself included, there is so much glorification of busy still in our culture. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an even more insidious expectation on mothers where if you have childcare, it needs to be an hour that you are working. Like the act of taking an hour off for yourself or an hour to just be with your notebook and see what comes through feels like so, I don't even know the word, I guess luxurious, but it's like,
I was going to say luxurious.
Something, but almost like entitled, like there's this edge to it that a lot of people will really question. And I still get this question a lot of like, you know, you have so much childcare. I'm like, well, yeah, I work a lot. And also to keep up with everything that I'm passionate about, including my children, I need time for myself. And yeah, it can happen at 4 a.m., but also like sometimes it's nice that it happens at 3 p.m., you know, and
100%. Yeah.
And I think that there is something that we don't give a lot of credence to around creativity, and how creativity has to have that open space to come through. And if we fill every single second of otherwise, you know, of our days, then when does creativity come through? And I think that's when you start to feel burnout and you start to feel resentment, because there's stuff that's wanting to come through from the ambitious, like, person who loves to work, who has this identity that is something outside of being a mother and has gifts and talents they want to bring to the world. And if those things are being forced to come through this like tight filter all the time, then they're stifled and they're impatient. And so we have to clear space for them. And I know that that's affronting to a lot of us, confronting to a lot of us, because we're like, well, that's an hour. I'm trading an hour that I otherwise could be with my kids to just sit here and let words come through on the page, or let the art come through, or whatever it might be. But I think that's such an important part of managing the huge mental load we carry, is like, you've got to get the brain dump out. You've got to get the ideas out. You got to get the creation spark started. Otherwise you just fester in burnout, or fester in like not loving your life.
I struggled with that a lot when Angel was little, and he was court ordered to go to daycare, like, or early Head Start, from like 2 months old on. And I remember dropping him off and just being like, I was going to cry all day. And then I started to find a rhythm. But I said to Shelly, my coach, I was like, I feel so guilty sitting and meditating or working out when I know I could be with him. And she said, would you rather have a mom who meditates pick you up from daycare, or a mom who did it? I was like, oh, fair. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I will have done things for myself today, and then I will be with Angel tonight, and I will be present, and I'll be so excited to see him. And that kind of quality to the experience, I think too, is what I remember with my parents, is like when we did stuff as a family, and I can picture like those moments where we're all really present, and I can't recall all of it, because how could you? Right?
Yeah. And also, you know, to know that he's safe. And I think I have to remind myself of that a lot when I feel that like guilt feeling come on, or where I can't get focused on work because I'm like, oh, I wish I was hanging out with them. And then, you know, I'm home today with one and I'm like, I wish he was at daycare, you know, but
he probably does too.
Yeah. It's that awareness of, I think a lot of the attunement of the nervous system also comes from, he's safe right now. And that is permission for me to relax into my own experience a little bit and not have to worry. And I know that like there's a biological drive in all of us to want to protect them and to want to know they're safe at all times. And that's part of the mental load, is like, are they safe right now? Where are they? And like the mental math of always being aware of where they are, even if they're not home. Like, I know you know where he is at this moment, even if he's not in your presence, just like I do. And I think that the awareness of safety and like mother's ability to feel safe, to know their child is okay, is the first piece of being able to let those hours be unfilled and clear. Because if you're worried about his safety, then you're not going to be able to sit there and do nothing, you know?
And I've had some rough days where something has come through on the news, or I'm just feeling something, and I'll go pick him up.
Yeah.
And I probably can't do that next year when he's in kindergarten. I mean, I'm sure I could if I really needed to, but that too, of like, he was fine. Yeah. I picked him up because I needed to pick him up. Right. And he's at school right now playing with a bunch of friends. He's an only child, which he also loves. The best is he'll reach a limit when we're having friends over or something. And he's like, I need some alone time. I'm like, okay. He's like, tell no one, I don't want anyone in my room. I'm like, okay. And he'll come back down after like 15 minutes. He's 5. He's been doing it since he was 3. Like, I need a minute. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
And he'll tell me, he'll be like, this is too much. I'm like, fair. Probably too much for me too.
Taught him regulate, you know, he's learned to self-regulate, which is great. And another whole chapter of a podcast we could talk about is resilience and teaching kids to be resilient by self-regulating. And I think like having yoga backgrounds, you and I understand what that means. But when I say that to a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily compute around part of what we want to be teaching our kids. And part of, I think, what is really hard to teach kids now, because they can constantly stimulate themselves with devices, is the ability to encounter boredom or encounter wanting something from a parent who cannot give it to them at that exact moment, and not being able to go find a soothing numb out device, but having to sit in that discomfort and go, okay, I'm going to go to my room to play by myself right now, or I'm going to make a toy out of this thing. And that teaches resilience, which it teaches nervous system regulation, which makes them more resilient to things like we talked about earlier, where maybe when they're 8 or 9 or 12 or 15 or 25, they're going to encounter something in real life that then demands resilient mindset. And if they haven't practiced that at home when they're 3 and 5, and you haven't helped them by honoring, like, okay, you need 15 minutes, go take it, buddy, not forcing them to stay in the room and play when they don't want to, they're going to struggle as adults. And I think we see that the evidence of that all around us these days, where you can tell these kids, adults who are dysregulated and really struggling were at one point children who weren't taught that it was okay if they needed 15 minutes, and it's okay to get bored and not get soothed right away with what you want or a device, and I think that's a big thing I grapple with a lot, because I feel myself when I'm stressed, I want the easy solution to make him stop whining or whatever. And I have to be super hyper aware that I'm not teaching regulation in this moment. I'm giving into the demand. And that's a trade-off that, has long-lasting effects down the line.
That's really good. And for us as adults, right? What are we reaching for outside of ourselves? What are we using to numb out? Really important work. Doesn't stop when you're 3, 5, or 25. That's
no,
for damn sure.
I'm like 40 and I feel like I'm going through like a whole new metamorphosis of nervous system regulation, having school-aged kids, and like you're saying, all the questions, and starting to think about them being out in the world more independently without me, and what does that mean for how I regulate myself? And yeah, it's a lot. So I think that's a whole other conversation, and yeah, we could go on and on. So before we sign off, can you share where people can find you, especially your classes? Because I cannot recommend your teaching enough, especially because yes, it's embodiment work and it's yoga, and we could all benefit from that, but you really explore a lot of this stuff in how you teach, and it's done in such like a subtle, artful way that it doesn't, if you're new to yoga or you're new to this kind of personal development, self-inquiry work, it doesn't feel overwhelming or hard. So share with us. Yes.
I love what I do. So you can find me at marybethlarue.com. I'm sure you'll write all that stuff in there, but I have a membership called Embodied by MB. You can also sign up for one-off classes, and it's all slow flow yoga. And so it can be, some of it's meditation and yin, some of it's like a 45-minute practice today, like a micro practice. Nothing's longer than an hour except for a workshop. And I spend so much time on my playlists and my sequences to soothe the nervous system, right? Like the BPM you're moving at, the beat you're moving at, what you're breathing at, it's all intentional. And then I have a slow flow teacher training. I'll be relaunching my embodied coaching program this fall. And I have retreats. And if you live in Colorado, come see me in Denver. I should be launching something in the next month or so.
Amazing. All right. Yeah, I will make sure all of that makes it into the show notes so you can find Mary Beth online. And just thank you so much again for being here today and for sharing the story. I know, just having followed along, I know how emotional it was for you. And I know sharing it still is a big act of generosity to share those deep emotions with people. So I really, really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
You're welcome. And thank you all for listening. And I will see you on a future episode.